Welcome to Intimacy Evolution, the podcast that helps you enjoy deeper connection and more intimacy in your relationships. I'm Brianna Carey, relationship and intimacy coach, and together with my husband Mark, a licensed professional counselor, we're here to help couples create the relationships they crave. Relationships evolve over time, and that's okay. Let's talk about it. Hello, and welcome to Intimacy Evolution. I am so excited to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Jessica Higgins. And in this conversation, we really dove into how to deeply connect during conflict. And she shares a lot of amazing tips and examples of her personal experiences and insight into how we can reflect on what is actually coming up for us in the moment of conflict, how to bring awareness to those emotions in the moment, and what it is that we either want to reveal to our partner or request of our partner in those moments of conflict. And she just has a beautiful way of sharing how we can navigate conflict to come back to connection with our partner. Dr. Jessica Higgins holds 2 graduate degrees in psychology, 2 coaching certifications, and over 20 years of experience helping clients to achieve successful results. She is the host of Empowered Relationship Podcast. She helps people to navigate the terrain of long-lasting intimacy more skillfully and mindfully. Through her coaching and online course, clients transform pain into love and connection. And I definitely felt that in this conversation. She even shared one of her free downloads that will be available to you. It is Shifting Criticism for Connected Communication. So that link is in the show notes, as well as her website and ways to connect with her. So again, I'm excited for you to listen in on this conversation, to take some tips and ideas away from it. So with that, let's get into the episode. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
I am as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I am really excited to delve into your expertise and for our listeners to just get some really juicy information from you, specifically around communication and conflict resolution. And so we're going to dive into all of that. So if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself and share some fun information about you.
Well, when you say fun, I don't always think of what I'm doing in the way of my work and how it developed. What might be fun for you to hear about?
What do you enjoy about life? What do you like to do?
Yes. Well, we were chatting about where I'm located, and I was sharing with you, my husband and I were in Santa Barbara, California for 8 years. We loved beach or sand volleyball prior to moving there, and it is quite heavenly being on the beach, being able to play and being social. And then often, Brianna, there's like dolphins porpoising by. And it was just like, this is my happy place.
Yeah.
And we've been traveling over the last 2 years, considering relocating. We were in Asheville, North Carolina. As I mentioned, your location was recommended to us many times. Anyway, all this to say, we ended up being an hour and a half north of where we were, and we're in a town, San Luis Obispo. And I'm very much looking forward to getting a community built of playing beach volleyball. And I also love yoga. I am a very, I would say, avid practicer when I am not in the midst of a renovation. And I love to hike. So I really love to be in nature, and I love to be really embodied. A lot of my work, I utilize my empathy and my intellect, and I do my best to use my body. And I also just find it a really nice compliment to have the outdoor time, especially because most of my work is in front of my computer.
Yes, I very much resonate with that. Oh my gosh, I love all of the things. Living on a beach is my dream. And so that is like something that we're considering as well in the next couple of years. And we love seeing volleyball as well. So maybe if
Oh,
you
you
get down
do?
to California, yeah, we can come hang out and play some volleyball.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Please look me up. And how tall are you? May I ask?
5'9".
Oh, okay. So you got a couple of inches on me, and that's a benefit.
Yeah. And I love setting. I like doing setting, but everybody always wants me to hit. I'm like, I'm a setter. um, but yeah, so I love that. Yeah, very much resonate with like being outdoors, being embodied. And I'm sure that comes into play with the work that you do as well. So if you want to give us a little bit more background into the work that you do, what was the catalyst for deciding to work with couples, relationship work? Did you know that's what you wanted to do? Or was there like something that kind of gave you that nudge?
I would say both. So the field of psychology, I don't know if my mother noticed it in me and then hence nurtured it. But
Mhm.
even as a young toddler and young child, she was like astounded at my interest in why people do what they do and what they were feeling. Like she was like, this is uncanny that you're able to like say, oh, they just did it because they said they were feeling like this or whatever I was imagining as a young one. Fast forward, junior high, I proclaimed I wanted to be a psychologist. And people are like, oh, you must be so lucky. It's been so clear. And yet I have meandered. There's, as you know, psychology is a huge field. And I worked a
Mhm.
lot with youth. And it wasn't until I experienced my own relationship challenges and really contended with, we had all the materials and the ingredients for a lifelong partnership. We thought we were going to get married. And what we ended up in our dynamic running into, and really the pain that we were facing and not being able to resolve our conflicts or the threats that were emerging. I didn't have that language for then. And it really ultimately really created a lot of disconnect for us. And it set me on a real interest in self study and really pulling out some books and finding some principles to practice. And I feel as though they started to work, but at that time, I actually got accepted into a PhD program. At that time, I had an undergrad in psychology. I had a master's in
Mm.
psychology. I was brought up with I statements and communication practices and this reflective listening. So I thought I was pretty well equipped to negotiate intimate relationship. And what we were spending hours dialoguing and just talking isn't necessarily the type of communication that's really needed. And the real, we can talk more about what that means
Yeah.
that we were looping. We tried to get support from therapists and spiritual guides, and some of it was helpful, but ultimately it didn't. But what it did do to your question is it really sparked a real passion around this isn't modeled. Well, it wasn't modeled in my upbringing. I didn't see it
Mhm.
visible in culture around real
Mhm.
conscious relating to resolve in a way that's secure functioning and really able to get at the deeper core and to be in service of real support. I've seen compromise, I've seen one person conceding and those type of things. So all that to say, I was really excited about what a relationship, what that could look like by practicing these principles. So I individually made a commitment that I'm going to be doing this work. And it's not, in the beginning phases of dating, it's not the sexy thing. It's not the pretty thing. And
Mhm.
I was committed to it anyway. I ended up meeting my husband. We were friends for like 6 months before we actually started dating, but I was practicing these principles from day one. And not all that to say, I I did my dissertation on this topic, and then I continue to learn and grow and train and all the things. But I do my very best to practice everything that's I talk about and teach and coach and all the things. So
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there is so much that we can dissect and everything that you shared. And I'm so excited. I was like taking notes. I was listening to you. I was like, okay, I need to write this down right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had mentioned looping. Um, so if you want to, can you explain that a little bit more,
Yes.
of how that shows up, what that looks like, and yeah.
Yeah. I think for many people who have experienced patterns of disconnection will be familiar with some form of loop. It's a pattern where it feels as though you're not connecting with your significant other. I've heard people say, and it feels as though it's like we're speaking different languages, that I'm doing my very best. I have the best intentions initially, and I am speaking as clearly as I possibly can, and it's being interpreted or perceived in an entirely different way. And I do a lot to talk about criticism and defensiveness. And
Hmm.
typically, what happens in these patterns or dynamics that are vicious loops when we're stuck in them, i- individuals unconsciously are protecting themselves and they have specific ways that they protect themselves. So they have moves and their tendencies that were learned and made perfect sense at one point, and yet likely the way we partner with another, it fits so perfectly that they feel injured by those very protective strategies. So that's often fits into the category of the classic dynamic of pursuer,
Hmm.
distancer.
Hmm.
I've had more of those anxious tendencies in the past. And depending on the stress level and what we're embarking, I still will see it emerge, even though I think we've arrived or not arrived, but like we've developed a real secure, functioning way of being together. And my husband's tendency is more towards the avoidant or withdrawing. And so his shutting down historically freaked me out. I was like, where are you going? Like, are you still with me? Like those type of things. And
Exactly.
and my protective strategy of checking in and trying to understand, or what it felt like to understand, that felt very inquisitive or querying. And I think even when we started dating, I was pretty aware of my delivery, but my energy was all a little bit needly, even though it didn't seem like I was attacking him or doing the interrogation.
Yeah.
But the subtle energy, I think through neuroception, we are picking up on the emotion more than we are the words.
The word.
That's where we're here. Yeah, the communications is like 80+% of what is actually being communicated. It's nonverbal.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. One thing that we talk about and try to, bring awareness to for couples is that about 69% of conflict is unresolvable because it's who we are. And so like speaking to you, like, like I'm being inquisitive, but the energy that was coming with that was not being received in an inquisitive, caring way. Um, I have a tone, even though I'm asking questions and I'm like, I'm curious. I tend to have a tone, which is something that I learned from my childhood. And so that can be, you know, activating for Mark. And I think that's something that we have one relationship example most of the time in
Mhm.
our life, our parents. And however they displayed conflict and resolution or not? Did they go behind shut doors? Did they not argue? Was it yelling? Like we had one example of this. And then you get into a partnership. And like you said, that protective mechanism is now like, you
Alive
know,
and activated. Yes, because in adulthood, it's really the only place people are very surprised. They might compare their other relationships and think, oh, none of my other relationships are trigger or like going into this looping. So it
uh-huh.
must be us. But really, intimate relationship in adulthood is typically the only relationship that our nervous system reads it as survival, just like our parent child bond when we were little, that we need it for survival. So our nervous system is activated in a way different way than it is with our coworkers, our family. I mean, family is going to trigger, but because sometimes those parent-child dynamics are still in
We revert
existence.
back.
Yes, yes. But friendships and all those things don't
Yeah.
activate in the same way.
Interesting. It makes sense though. That's your partner, that's the person you're choosing. And yeah, survival would be paired with that partnership.
The
So it
bonding.
makes, yeah.
Yes, yes, the pair bonding. And I agree with you. I think even the Gottman Institute in their research, they say every couple has 7 to 8 irreconcilable differences. And I remember hearing that. I was like, that seemed like a lot. And I was contemplating it. And I'm like, by that next day, I was like, yep, we absolutely do. And it's
Yeah.
not to your point that it's anything on face value, good, bad, right, or wrong. It's the
Right.
introvert, the extrovert, the spender, the saver. And that poses opportunity for differences. How we negotiate differences is the absolute training ground for
Yeah.
how do we work together when there is conflict or differences.
Mhm.
How we deal with that can escalate to very problematic conflict. But it is, if you will, curriculum for us to learn how to work together. And that typically, to your point, we haven't had a lot of great modeling or practicing for.
Yeah. We're not taught how to have relationships. We just go through life and pick pieces of what was, ingrained in us or what what we want, what we don't want. And can you share more about that? About it's not necessarily it's not avoiding conflict because you can't, but it's about how you navigate the conflict and coming to resolution or back to connection more quickly.
Oh my
Can you
goodness.
share a little bit more about that?
Yes. As you ask this question, everything that comes up in me is it's about safety. And we hear a lot about safety. And I think with all the attachment research in the last 10 plus years, it sometimes gets interpreted as, oh, my partner needs to create safety for me. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about interdependence where two people, if we're talking about a monogamous dyad here, that
Yeah.
two people are able to find their footing, find their position,
Hmm.
both people. And then here's to your point, how we create safety is we get underneath the protective strategies. We drop into the core emotion, the primary attachment, longing, and the fear. That is not conscious typically, even for myself, who I've,
Yeah.
as I mentioned, all my training and background, and I've been with my husband 18 plus years, and I've been practicing and I believe in this work. I'm leaned in and I'm not always conscious when I feel my protective tendencies get activated. So
Right.
it really looks like, can we slow down? Can we access? And sometimes we can do that in partnership. Sometimes we need to do a little bit of an individual excavating, unpacking, deeper dive. Sometimes we need support to do that. But when we can get to that more vulnerable place, then we're able to send a clear signal that our partner doesn't have to decode. They don't have to feel injured by, AKA the protective move, and they're more likely to respond. There are blocks and things that interfere, especially if it's a longstanding relationship where there's been traumas. But typically, this is where Brene Brown's work is so powerful, that we feel that even your responsiveness to me as I'm even describing it, I'm like, oh, right. It's a leaning in, it creates a desire to come close, to turn towards. And then we're able to see each other. That's where we have deeper understanding. That's where we have more connection. We may not like it,
Yeah.
but at least we can start having each other's back. Typically, we're like, oh, I feel you and I want to help. It's not my responsibility, but I want to help. I love you and I care and I want to help.
I got really excited when you were talking about like interdependence because there's not a lot of talk about that. And I always, we share that a lot. And like interdependence, like you have to do your own stuff too. And then that makes the partnership so much stronger. Um, ugh, there's so much there. What would you suggest? How do you help couples that have maybe been dealing with this for a while and they're just like, there's no changing. There's no like, is there any hope for us in how we communicate and can we come to each other?
Mhm. Yes. Well, I just want to say in my work, I've seen spouses, partners who've been together maybe even 18, 19, 20 years or 12 or whatever, a long length of time. And not always. Sometimes there's blocks where people are like, I have a client, he's like, oh, this feels so good, but this is not how it is. And I don't know how to trust this. So it's like part of him was like, oh my gosh, this is everything I've ever wanted. And then also another part that's like, I don't ever get this. And how do I trust that this is going to stick? Uh, but I have seen just the melting away of just all the armoring. And for people who are feeling hopeless, I mean, I was sharing a story about my relationship prior to my husband and it didn't work out. And we were incredibly stuck. So I guess what I would say is that it's not what it looks like on face value. So again, when we look at our protective moves, I mean, there was no lost effort. It was not that we weren't trying. Yeah. We put a tremendous amount of energy into trying to really understand, but the way in which we were doing it from that defended, armored up, protective way. And again, when we're speaking different languages, we're really kind of lost and it's almost like wheels and mud just spinning around. Yeah. And so whether or not, I mean, I was able to get some orientation and get my bearings. I love that you really do a lot with Mark to emphasize the interdependence. I was reading, I don't know if you've worked with David Schnarch's principles. So he's all about differentiation and how to hold on to yourself, even if your partner isn't agreeing with you, how to tolerate some of that discomfort, how to self-soothe. And I was like, how does this fit with the EFT, the emotional focus therapy? And I know exactly how they fit. And I remember doing the training, I was like, oh, that's it. But basically for people listening, or even for myself, if I'm caught in a loop, if I can recognize there's a disconnect dynamic happening here, that so in the EFT language, we talk about it around the upper layers. And those are the protective strategies, the strategies that we're not really even fully conscious of in the moment. And as I mentioned, they typically land with the other. So I'll use myself as an example. When I would query or get inquisitive, that my underneath vulnerable need was, I'm scared you're not wanting to resolve this, that you're going to go away, or even fear of abandonment. My questioning him looked to him and felt to him that he was doing it wrong, that he wasn't good enough. Because I was questioning, he was like, oh, like his radar, his warning signals were going off. Yeah. His protective move was to kind of like get quiet, get more contained, kind of go a little bit distant. And that would obviously escalate my fear. And I would get a little bit more clear about my language, or even maybe more pointed. And so you could see that this just kind of endless the looping. Yeah. So to the question around how do we get out of this, I think just first of all, recognizing there are deeper layers that we're probably not aware of. How do we get some time and space to slow our nervous systems down so that we can have some inquiry around, if my husband were to do the thing that I wanted, what would that allow me to feel? Or what is it that I'm afraid of? What's underneath my judgment or my criticism? Mm-hmm. And so granted, so this was early 2005. We weren't really like romantically partnered then, but I remember practicing and it was like, again, stuff that I was like, if I was trying to put my best foot forward, I would not be saying this. It was like, I can't remember, but it was like, I was speaking as the Hendrick, Gay and Katie Hendricks's work. They talk about the sweaty 10-minute conversation, or speak the uncomfortable truth. And it was like exactly that. And then when we did start dating and I was sharing things like, I'm afraid I'm more into you than you are to me. Like that was not the attractive, in my mind, the playbook for dating of how to, and it wasn't that I was trying to get him to change or that I could stand. This is that balance of like, I had me even though I was afraid of him not being into me as much or not wanting to really invest the effort as much.
Yeah.
Me just being able to say that, make it conscious, send a clear signal. There's a couple things that happen. One, I had my own back.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't pretending that I wasn't scared. I wasn't unconsciously reacting, trying to protect and get security by these maneuvers that were pushing the person away. So I could feel inside myself that even if he isn't that into me, I'm acknowledging that this is important and I am into you. It's kind of good to know sooner rather than later. So it's almost like that felt a bit empowering. And then number two, ironically, the thing that felt the like unlovable or the unsexy thing to say is the thing that he softened to and did lean in and did turn towards. Ironic, but it was so that's a lot for someone who's listening. It just feels really, really stuck. And sometimes so I'm talking about a new relationship where there wasn't a lot of baggage. When we have previous injuries and we don't trust, it is difficult. I would recommend getting support with a coach, someone who's either trained in EFT or has training in various couples modalities that can really help offer some guidance, because there's a lot happening in the couple dynamic and it's happening fast. And so the more we can slow down, the more we can build awareness around the vulnerable, then the more likely we are to be able to send that more vulnerable reveal, and increases the likelihood that our partner is going to respond more connected or more engaged.
Yeah. I really love that you shared that story because one, wouldn't that be so great for people that are in the dating field to just own their truth and share that, and it's okay. Like, yes, you may be hurt a little bit, but just to know that you are like in integrity with yourself, speaking what you're feeling from the very beginning. Like, what a great foundation to start
Mhm.
your relationship if that does progress. One. Um, Two, for those that are in partnership, excuse me, um, and maybe have past hurt coming up or in, their current relationship hurt coming up, to choose to be vulnerable. But like you said, you're having these conversations with your husband, and it's like, I'm coming at this from a place of like, I feel like does he still want to be with me? And so people that are feeling that, it can be scary to be vulnerable and share like, hey, like, we got to do something different.
I want to emphasize
Yeah.
that I didn't even know that that's how I felt.
Yeah.
For me, this is why sometimes the criticism, defensiveness is sometimes where people get drawn in and get interested, because on surface level, even if I don't really identify with being very critical as a person just throughout my life or super
Mhm.
judgy. But when something hurts, the human tendency is to point to it. So when we point to the thing that hurts and it happens to be our partner,
Our greatest mirror.
yeah, and it's going to sound like we're talking about them.
Mhm.
So as you're describing, it's just crazy when I look back. But there was this one interaction, and I don't think we were like brand spanking new. And we did have a foundation of friendship. So it wasn't like we were just getting to know each other like full on. But we were in my living room and we were having a heated discussion about something. And he could feel my emotion. I thought I was doing a really great job of being diplomatic, but he could feel me.
Mm.
And as it escalated, and not it wouldn't if a fly was on the wall, it didn't look like we were fighting. It just my pursuing and him distancing and that kind of looping a few times.
Mhm.
Legit, he like started falling asleep.
Oh.
And I'm like, are you, it's like, is he really falling asleep? So I was like, oh. So just to say, like, on face value, in that moment, it wasn't like, oh, I'm super vulnerable, right? It's easy to point. And okay, so fast forward, we're doing this remodeling. He's got a little bit of a tendency to opt for the more efficient, best viable option, streamlined. He's conserving energy. And I remember him asking me at one point, he's like, does that account when you're considering what you want to get done or what your vision is, are you accounting for energy? And I'm like, no, I'm actually looking at what would I love? And like, what are all the like ways, like I do all this research to see how can I get, what's the best, I'm looking for what's the best outcome. And so I will put a lot of energy. And so that's a conflict that's irreconcilable that we run into over and over and over again. So it was probably 2 weeks ago and I was laying in bed and I was like finding myself being a little judgy. And I was saying to myself, like, okay, if to that question around, so my judgment was, my thought was like, oh, I wish he was a little bit more engaged. I wish he was a little bit more proactive and like really like taking this on. And I was like, oh, let me turn that into a question for myself. If my husband was more engaged and proactive around this project, what would that allow me to feel? And immediately was like, oh, I could relax a little more. And I was like, oh, that's so helpful. And so whether or not I show up for myself, the kind of interdependence, like it's not his responsibility to make sure I'm getting enough downtime, right?
Yeah.
And there might be moments where I communicate that more vulnerably to him around like, I feel like I'm taking a lot of responsibility or I'm afraid I'm taking on too much or whatever the things are. And can we talk about our division of labor here? And that's a way more productive conversation than if I would lead with, oh, you seem a little, I would never say this. I don't think I would think this, but it could come out like, oh, you seem a little lazy or you're uninvolved or you're not really taking this seriously or those type of things. So that was a long way to say on first blink, I don't know anyone that's going to come up with the vulnerable, deeper core feeling. It takes a little time to query and really get access and unpack that.
Yeah. No, I love that you shared that had the thought, which activated your self-reflection. And I think that's a point that a lot of people in general need to take away and remember that like when we start projecting, that's an invitation to reflect and go inward to be like, okay, what is actually happening? What am I feeling? What do I want out of this? Uh, yeah, I think that's like just take
Yeah,
a little note, rewind this back, listen to it again, write it down, and this is your reminder.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Because so much is well intended. But again, if we're on this autopilot of I'm doing what I know works,
Mhm.
whether or not it's somebody that gets loud or some, whatever the moves are, that we're not intending to be hurtful.
Right.
But when we're kicked in, we can feel if we're like moving fast or our heart rate is moving or beating faster or whatever the cues are to let us know we're a little sweaty or we're feeling some tension. Those are all really good indicators that we are activated. And so the real invitation to your point to slow down and wonder, that's going to give us a real different access point to more of this opportunity for connecting and real revealing and understanding on a deeper level.
Mm. Yeah. Um, I have another follow-up to that. When a couple finds themselves in an escalated conflict and they see like they're like, okay, this is we're stonewalled, like we're not going anywhere right now. Like one's shutting down, one's like pursuing, like, but one of them is like recognizing like we need a break. Like we need like what do you suggest in those moments when emotions are very high? How can they come yeah, what do you suggest they work through? Like how can they work through that?
Mhm. Well, I want to say this is tricky because in a dyad and partnership, likely one person's going to be more in favor of hashing it out and working it out. And the other one is going to be more in favor of giving it a rest, coming back to it when things are a little calmer. So there's going to be preferences. And this is, whatever the suggestion is, it's going to be catered towards more one than the other. Having said that, if we get out of that immediate preference and we look at what's the real goal, and if the intention and the vision is we want to work together, we want to learn how to have each other's back, we want to do our best to achieve a win-win, we want to be for each other. It's not about being right? Sometimes we get into that automatic human tendency of like, but my way, and sometimes we don't even know why the thing we're suggesting means so much. Sometimes even asking like, why does this matter to me so much?
Yeah.
What's the significance? Those are some of those deeper questions. And then if there's a bit of revisiting that desire that we're for each other, then perhaps it takes a little bit of that pressure off. Then we can get a little bit more exploratory, understand, okay, what is the need here? What is it that you're really wanting? Like, so if my goal was if we're taking a vacation and we're to go to the beach and that I'm like, super like, that's what we need to do. And my husband's like, no, we need to go to the mountains. And he's like, no, that's what we need to do. Sure, it might actually be about the geographical location. But if I ask myself again, what would being at the beach allow me to feel?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is to feel more relaxed, or maybe my husband is like, I want more adventure, or, whatever. So if we really get at those things that matter, then we can put on the table relaxation and adventure.
Yeah.
Then we can get a little bit more creative and look at, okay, how is this a win for both of us? Now, if we're in those more escalated moments and it feels like we're not in a place where we can access that goodwill, I think it can be helpful. I did this when I was really young. I came across, I don't know whose work it was, but it was like, am I wanting to be right here or am I trying to resolve this? And that's a good litmus test, because there have been many times where I'm like, oh, I think I want to be right. And so I'm like, okay, foot in mouth. That's the time to pause. At least I know. Yeah. And it's not a bad thing. We're human and we have that tendency to like, that dopamine hit when we win, right? Yeah. It's just part of, and especially in the West, like we're in a very competitive culture. So if we can check in around that goal and we really still wanting to work this out, or the one that's a little bit more trying to like calm, and if their system is like, no, I just am overwhelmed and I can't even see like clear. I feel like things are closing in. That isn't like, I'm not interested in resolving it right now. I'm interested in just getting myself back online. Yeah. Good to know, right? So either one of those can be good questions to ask depending on one's tendency. But when we're looking at the couple dynamic, I think it could be best to have this done at a time instead of trying to implement something live when it's never been discussed. But typically, recommendation is at least 20 minutes to calm the nervous system. And if we can take a little break or a pause, and for the person that doesn't want to take the break, the real critical piece to this is that we say when we're going to come back, whether or not it's we need to renegotiate a longer time and I need more time, or we're going to do our best attempt to resolve this, whether or not it's in 20 minutes or whether or not it's in a couple hours, or even maybe tomorrow if time is a factor, like, different commitments are on the table. But the person who wants to work it out maybe is a little bit more prone to feeling abandoned or left, things or things getting swept underneath the rug. Yeah. There's a little bit more reassurance that the person does want to come back. It is important. And then they can tolerate more of that discomfort. I'm not going to say it's comfortable, but it is a little more doable than one just saying, I'm out, peace, or like, I'm done. Like that question, that statement of I'm done. What does I'm done mean? Does it mean I'm done right now? Does it mean I'm done? Like, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, calming the nervous system to do what we were talking about earlier, get at those deeper layers, but that's not going to happen when things are like super intense and in the cycle.
There's been so much good stuff here. I'm so excited to listen back to this and just like take notes for myself. Is there any last minute or final thoughts or suggestions that you would like to share with our listeners?
Mm. Well, I've mentioned the criticism and the defensive loop a couple times. And one of the real key things that I want to look at there, or perhaps offer to your people listening, that again, if we can see that as a attempt to get a need met,
Mm.
and that maybe we're not really aware of what that need is, and if we can do some of what we talked about, if we can turn whatever the criticism is or the what we would have said if we didn't catch it, however small or however big of how much it means, the significance, if we can turn it into a request or a reveal. A reveal is more of that vulnerable thing we were talking about, but sometimes it's simply a request. And perhaps if we can let them know why it matters, that's super helpful, because by and large, we're not in partnership to get unsolicited feedback or evaluation. We didn't sign up to be evaluated, and nor,
Right.
even if our partners got good feedback and it's unsolicited, we typically are not, we want to feel that sense of seen, heard, that real bondedness and connection. And we do honestly, I mean, you probably know this better than any, that some of the erotic tension and polarity comes from when we hold our differences. And so for us to be able to offer what we're feeling or have a request that might be different, that we can make room for that. And I kind of lost my train of thought there, but that's what I would recommend is really just having an opportunity to pause, to be able to shift into a request or a reveal that really gives your partner, because it's honestly, they're going to get caught on defending themselves. And it's kind of like taking the bait. It's like really going towards a smoke signal, when really the deeper thing, it's like, it's going to get people off and running on something that, because the person that's attempting to get a need met, if they don't lead with the need, it's not going to get met, and they're going to feel
Right.
crappy. And the other person's going to feel crappy because they felt mischaracterized and they want to defend themselves.
Yeah.
So that's what I'll
Your
say.
partner's not a mind reader, so you have to speak your need.
Right.
I love the phrasing, a request or reveal. That's like, ooh, those are good, just little easy reminders for yourself when those are coming up. So I love that. I love it so much. Yeah. Please share with our listeners where they can find you, how they can connect, and if you have anything that you'd like to share with them.
Yeah. Well, my website is drjessicahiggins.com. That's doctor with a DR. And what we've been talking about a little bit, I do have a free offer that is a simple download, and it helps people reverse engineer a critical tendency and how to really rework that language, that startup, so that it is more of a request or a reveal. And there's lots of examples. I think there's like 20 something examples, and what it sounds like when we're critical, like real situations and real language, and then how perhaps that would sound if we were utilizing kind of the deeper need or the vulnerability and making that into a request or a reveal. So it's a good kind of workshop tool. And I think you have the link to that.
Yes,
And
I'll be
then,
sharing that.
yeah, I have a podcast where I offer, I think I've been podcasting since 2015, and I delivered a lot of the content initially, and then I interview other people and experts and guests, and that's Empowered Relationship.
I love it. Oh my gosh. I will share all of the links in the show notes for sure. Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And like I said, I'm really excited to listen back to it and take notes for myself. So thank you so much for joining us today. All right, everyone. We will see you on the next episode.